very pleased to be bringing you the first of what will become an annual event, the Regional Conservation Symposium that we will host in future years based on how popular this event was after we announced it. We will get bigger, and hopefully will attract more presenters and more attendees, and have to move to a larger venue, obviously. Thank you all for coming. I would especially like to thank all of our presenters who are coming from a myriad number of locations throughout New England, from various Audubons in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, as well as Tufts University, University of Vermont, URI, UMass Amherst, and Southern Virginia University. So I am here to announce the vision statement of the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and then introduce our keynote speaker, Chris Elphick. In 2020, the Audubon Society of Rhode Island developed a strategic plan that would put them squarely in focus with the ability to do what we can to be better stewards of our refuges and to manage the wildlife populations based on habitat assessments and data that were collected across all 9,500 acres that we manage. When I was brought on board in September of 2021 as the Director of Avian Research, I had two main goals based on that strategic plan that we created. The first of which was to bring the messaging of the scientific community to the general public in a way that is easy to understand. Personally, I've always felt that there is a relatively large gap in communication between science and the work that scientists do to better understand climate change, to better understand the issues with regards to imperiled wildlife, be it building strikes, cat predation, habitat loss, or climate change, and the communication of that information to the general public. And it is absolutely the case that collectively we can do more good from a conservation perspective. So arming you with the knowledge of what is going on, what is understood about the bird populations throughout New England, turns you all into better stewards of the environment, of the bird populations, and of our region. So right out of the gate, the top principal priority was to organize a symposium such as this. There are even papers, here's one cited from 2013, in which it suggested that ways in which science can be communicated to the general public is something that should be taught at the undergraduate level to budding scientists, so that we are better able to communicate the work that we do across multiple platforms into a larger audience. And so that's why the very first thing I did in September 2021 was start internal meetings at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island about arranging this symposium. So I'm incredibly happy that it panned out the way that it did, and we were able to put it together and bring it to you in a fairly fast way. The other big impetus that we had when we designed the new strategic plan was to start analyzing for the first time our bird populations on our refuges, understanding their needs, understanding their habitat associations that they tend to exhibit when they nest, overwinter, or migrate through our properties. And we also wanted to do what we could to effectively manage those populations, however we can, whether it's through effective monitoring schemes to determine what the population sizes are and what steps we might be able to take to better manage them, and then communicate that information on a broad scale, not just here in Rhode Island, but regionally, through events like this and through working with partners throughout New England that are also doing similar research. And so I'm very proud to announce that today we are releasing our first ever State of the Birds report. You can download the report. It is fantastic. It's a great resource for us internally to use, and it's also information that if you've ever walked any of our refuges, you can read through and better understand our birds, their needs, and what we propose to do about bringing some of these beleaguered populations back. So it's a 97-page PDF file that you can download there, and I'll walk you through just a couple of the key points of the report now. The data that went into the creation of this report came from three big sources, the first of which was our volunteers. We have a tremendous number of passionate volunteers. Rhode Island, for being a small state, has a lot of really passionate and dedicated birders, and a lot of them came out to help with the collection of the data so that we could create this baseline report. Many of them are actually in this room. Raise your hand if you contributed data to the State of the Birds report. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Concurrent with the volunteer data collection, we did a number of point counts throughout our refuge complex. And so we not only went out and counted the actual birds, looked at their distribution, and measured the habitat variables, but we used all of that information to create models that could predict what the most important habitats were for the species utilizing our refuges and start to understand the bird habitat associations more finely here on our parcels. In addition to that, you cannot conserve anything unless you have a baseline, unless you know where you're starting. And so not only are we collecting data on the distribution, abundance, and habitat associations of birds on our refuges, but we also wanted to visualize how these populations are doing at the regional scale. So we analyzed 53 years worth of breeding bird survey data for the Mid-Atlantic and New England conservation region, outlined here in black, to look at how populations have trended over the last 53 years. And then we used eBird status and trend maps to visualize on the North American scale how these bird populations are doing. All of this information collectively went into informing this report. What we found was, for example, in the breeding season, 34% of all of the birds found breeding on Audubon refuges are experiencing declines over the last 50 years at the Mid-Atlantic scale. So a third of all of the birds that are found nesting on our properties have been declining for decades. Only a quarter of those species are actually increasing. Overwintering populations are almost doing as poorly, as a matter of fact. Almost a third are declining, and again, just a quarter are increasing in population size through time. To effectively visualize communities, avian communities, and figure out how we can better conserve the communities by looking at habitat associations and conserving and working towards managing those habitats themselves, we subdivided all of the birds found on our refuges into one of 12 guilds. A guild is a way to take species that may be completely unrelated, but because of shared habitat selection or shared habits such as diet, you can combine them and understand better how you can actually see trends throughout groups that share these similarities. And so across these guilds, we see quite large declines in groups of aerial insectivores, early successional or scrub-shrub specialists, grassland habitat birds, salt marsh birds, and urban birds, believe it or not. A lot of people don't realize that even the most common human-modified landscape specialists, such as European starlings and rock pigeons, have been declining steadily for the last 50 years. The common grackle has lost 60% of its population in the Mid-Atlantic over the last 50 years alone. When we looked at the habitat selection of the birds based on the point count data that we collected, we were able to understand how birds behave specific to our parcels. So for example, at the state level, you might be able to tell what habitats birds commonly associate with. And you might find species breeding in residential areas, maybe in your backyard, and maybe in urban environments. The fact of the matter is the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, across our 9,500 acres that we conserve, we don't conserve any urban habitat, we don't conserve any residential habitat. So the question becomes, how can we focus our attention on the birds that are utilizing our refuges? Because the same species show up to breed in our refuges, which habitats do they tend to hone in on when they do so? So here's just one example. This is the black-throated green warbler. We can tell from the habitat importance models that we ran that the most important habitat, that predicting the presence of this particular species, is evergreen forests right here. More importantly than that, we can tell that in the top 5 most important habitats at predicting the presence of the species, evergreen forests is actually twice as important as the next most important habitat, which is deciduous forest. So not only is this species almost exclusively found in evergreen forests, but it seems to be an evergreen forest specialist on Audubon parcels. So focusing our conservation attention to evergreen forests will, in this example, protect and help to mitigate declines of this particular species. When you put all of that information together, you develop a more holistic picture of birds, what their needs are throughout the year, because we're doing this to understand the full annual cycle of birds. We're not just looking at the breeding season. We also want to understand how birds are faring during the overwintering periods when they choose to spend the non-breeding periods here in Rhode Island. And we're also looking throughout the periods of migration when birds transit through either northbound during spring migration or southbound during fall migration, and they stop over on Audubon parcels. What Taking one example, this is a very common species. You can see that this very common species has been declining at a rate of 0.6% per year for 53 years straight in the mid-Atlantic. So even the American robin is not insulated from these declines. Here is the actual trend and status map across the entire breeding range of the American robin in North America, and you can see the red indicating decline is pretty extensive on that map. So this bird is declining throughout the majority of its breeding range, not just here in Rhode Island. So here is information that is specific to our region, the Mid-Atlantic. Here is information specific to the entire breeding range in North America for that species. And then this is the type of information that we gathered specific to our refuges. We found American robins occupied 100% of the refuges we surveyed during the breeding season, and their top habitat selection was developed open space. So large open areas that are not being developed. Non-breeding season, this species was found on 93% of our refuges and was most commonly associated with shrub habitat. So there was a shift in the habitat used by this bird to more scrubby, open habitats. And the habitat similarity between seasons was not even 50%, meaning that this is a true generalist. You can find them throughout a myriad form of habitats during the breeding season and again during the non-breeding season. We did have some species that had the exact same habitats that they selected in both seasons. An example would be the white-breasted nuthatch. We found the top habitats that species chose in the breeding season were identical to the ones that we detected them on during the non-breeding season. If you flip through our report, the last 40 pages or so of that 97-page report has this information for every single species detected on our refuge. So we now know the regional trend for these species, as well as the habitats that are most important at predicting their presence on Audubon parcels. So habitat importance plots were created for 83 breeding species and over 40 non-breeding species. All of that information armed us with the ability to create a list of responsibility birds. This is a term coined from Vermont Audubon, which we are borrowing because it, simply put, is a fantastic way to think about this. Collectively, it's our responsibility to do something to mitigate and reverse these declines that we've been seeing. After all, it's because of human activity that these birds are declining in the first place, and the bulk of all of these species are exhibiting some form of decline. If it's not here in the Mid-Atlantic, it's somewhere else within their range. So we had three primary ways in which we define a responsibility bird. The first of which was, is this a species that's relatively easy to monitor? Because the next step is to develop monitoring schemes whereby our volunteers primarily can go out and collect additional detailed information on these species. Not just what habitats they are affiliated with, but also what are the major phenological periods for that species on our refuges. So the major biological periods that that bird experiences. When they show up during spring migration, when they begin building nests, when they lay their eggs, when those chicks fledge, and when they go through molts and leave on migration again. So that detailed information will help us to create more effective and efficient monitoring plans, and it starts with the ability of our volunteers to go out and collect this information. So it has to be a bird that's relatively easy to observe, can't be too cryptic, has loud vocalizations that are easy to identify. So even though we have a large percentage of our species declining, there are a select number that are suited well as a responsibility species for our volunteers to go out and collect additional information on. The second point is this a species that we can actually help? So for some species, unfortunately, no matter how much work we put into conservation and management here at Audubon, there isn't much that we can do to stave off the decline that we're seeing at the regional scale. For some species, the decline is largely driven by factors during periods of migration or during the non-breeding season, if we're talking about a species that breeds here in Rhode Island. And no amount of management we do here in Rhode Island is likely to impact the decline of that particular species and reverse the declining trend. So we wanted to focus in on species that we actually had a good ability to help through effective management across the 9,500 acres that we currently manage. And then lastly, is the species selected considered an umbrella species? An umbrella species is a bird species, or any wildlife species for that matter, that through the conservation of that one species, you indirectly help a suite of other species that are closely related because they share similar habitats, similar foraging regimes, similar The idea is that we are selecting a subset of the species in decline, but that subset, through the management of those few individuals, will actually indirectly help a much larger suite of species, many of which are also in decline. So going off of this list and going back through all of that data that we analyzed, we came up with a list of 9 species, which are each outlined in that report. So once you get your hands on the report, you can go through them all, but here are just 2 examples of them. On the left is the common yellowthroat. As the name suggests, this is one of the most common breeding species of warbler in the state of Rhode Island. However, we've seen that this species has declined at a rate of 1.5% per year over the last 53 years in the mid-Atlantic. And if you look at the status and trend graph, this is all of eastern North America, and it's almost completely red. So the common yellowthroat has become less common over the last 5 decades. And what we need to do is make sure that we are being proactive in our management. Common yellowthroats have huge populations. They have very broad geographic ranges. And so if you go to many accounts, such as Cornell Labs Birds of the World, you'll see that they're still listed as species of least concern. Our goal is to keep common birds common, through proactive conservation where we can do small things now that contribute to a growing population locally, that can help supplement both regional and North American populations as a whole. So now we know that common yellowthroats are declining quite dramatically here in Rhode Island and beyond. We know the habitat types that they are most commonly associated with when they are found on our refuges. And so we will develop advanced monitoring schemes for our volunteers to go out and collect additional information on this species in the hopes that we can keep the common yellowthroat from becoming the uncommon yellowthroat and then eventually the rare common throat. On the right, you see the black and white warbler. This is another species found breeding on a large percentage of our refuges. This species has been declining at a rate of 2.4% per year over the last 53 years. And you can see that the map, the status and trends map, looks quite different. You do see areas in which the species is increasing, but here in southern Rhode Island, southern New England, you see pockets of decline. This is a species that is incredibly sensitive to habitat fragmentation. So one of our big questions that we are going to hopefully answer through our monitoring schemes is what is the critical size habitat that black and white warblers need in order to breed effectively? We have a large number of large refuges and an even larger number of smaller parcels. Can black and white warblers nest successfully on those smaller parcels, or is there some critical area requirement of the species in order for them to breed successfully and therefore supplement the regional population and at least at the very minimum mitigate losses that we're seeing here in the state and throughout the Mid-Atlantic and New England. So these are just 2 examples of responsibilities, 2 out of the 9 species we've identified. And this goes back into the 3-tiered approach that we're taking with this avian research initiative here at Rhode Island. The first of which is collect that baseline data. Understand what we have, understand where it is found, how many individuals there are, what the habitat associations with there are, that they exhibit, so that we can more effectively manage them. Identify those subsets of species that we can collect additional information on, and then step 2 is to implement monitoring schemes for those 9 species. So in the coming 2 to 3 years, we are going to be doing extensive monitoring of those 9 responsibility birds, helping to answer lots and lots of questions. These habitat graphs that we showed can tell you how important habitats are at predicting the presence of a given species, but they don't tell you anything about the abundance. What is it that determines whether you're going to find 10 robins or 20 robins? This is more additional information that needs to be collected, and that's what we'll be doing in the coming years. Then, armed with all of this information we've gathered through baseline data collection, and armed with all of this information we've created through this monitoring scheme that we've devised, we will implement a series of management plans that will be much more effective, much less costly, and much more likely to actually result in increases in these populations as opposed to wasted man hours and wasted management because we don't have that information available to us. So those are the 3 steps that we are going to be taking to complete this 3-tiered approach to the management of these species across our refuges. So I definitely would tell you that you should take the 2.5 hours to go through this report. Read it, go through the graphs, find out what your favorite species are doing in terms of where they're found, how their populations are faring, what habitats they're commonly associated with. become emboldened in your power as a steward. Each and every one of you in this room is a steward of the environment. A lot of you have already shown that by showing up, coming out, helping collect data, and everybody can actually contribute to the conservation of these species, and that's precisely why we're all here today. So that after today, you leave this building armed with so much more knowledge than you came in with this morning about what species are in peril, what we know about them, and what's being done to mitigate declines and hopefully reverse them. So after today, with all of these fine scientists that have come to tell you about their research and tell you about it in a way that is easy for you to understand, you can go home, go forth, and become better stewards of the habitat around you. So I'd like to thank a large number of people. I'd actually like to thank our new Executive Director, Jeff Hall of Audubon, who has been a very strong proponent of this research. As soon as Jeff was brought on board, he sat down with me and basically said, what is it that you need? What is it that you need to make this work so that we can collectively as an organization move forward with a new vision towards being better managers of the beleaguered bird populations that are calling our refuges home. So thank you to Jeff. Thank you to all of the staff and volunteers who have helped put this symposium together. It took a small army to get us all here today and to put all of this together, and I really thank them for their time. And most importantly, thank you to all of you volunteers who went out and helped collect data that was instrumental in the creation of this baseline report. So we are incredibly indebted to all of you, and I certainly hope that you will continue to contribute your time and your effort in the coming years as we develop these monitoring schemes for responsibility birds. And for those of you in this room who are local enough that you can participate in data collection and have not yet done so, please sign up as a volunteer, help us collect additional information that will make the second State of Our Birds report a little bit more rosy